Hello, class. Welcome to Chapter 7. This is Socio-Emotional Development in Middle Childhood. This is one of our biggest chapters of the semester, so make sure you plan to spend a fair bit of time in this chapter. I promise some of the other chapters this week will be a little bit shorter. So we have 4 goals for this chapter. We're going to be looking at parenting, both parenting style and parenting practices, including spanking, that wonderfully controversial topic. We will be looking at some family dynamics stuff like birth order and divorce, which you may find interesting if that stuff applies to you. We'll look at peer relationships, including cliques, crowds, and characteristics of popular, neglected, and rejected children. And then finally, there's a section on child maltreatment. This video is going to address parenting style. Okay, let's get started on that. So we're going to start, I want to start by introducing to you one of the most important figures in our course and in developmental psychology, and this is Diana Baumrind. She's working in her major publications. She has many, but major publications in 67 and 71. Her work was picked up by Maccabee and Martin, who expanded her work significantly as well. She argues that there are 2 important dimensions on which parents vary, and that this produces what's called parenting style. And I want to clarify that there is a difference between parenting style and parenting practices. Style is your overall approach to parenting in terms of how warm you are, how responsive, how much you supervise, how high your expectations are, what kind of discipline, what your approach to discipline is. And then parenting practices is what specific behaviors are you doing? Do you punish? Do you take away privileges? Do you have sticker charts? Do you watch movies together? Do you hug or not? Do you see the difference? There's sort of your general style, and then there's the very specific things you do. So warmth and control are the 2 dimensions that seem to be the most important as far as identifying what a parent's parenting style is. And when you look at those 2, you end up producing 4 different parenting styles. So warmth means responsiveness, acceptance of the child, supportiveness of the child, involvement in their life, how much you're communicating with them, and how much you're willing to let them argue and share their viewpoint with you, and your receptiveness to the perspective of the child, your receptiveness to the needs of the child. Control is how much are you supervising? How much are you monitoring what they're doing? Does their bedroom door have to be open when they're in there with their girlfriend? Do you check the phone? Do you know where they are at midnight on Friday night? It also has to do with discipline and limit setting and what your expectations are. So some parents set limits and hold to them, and some don't. So what this leads us into is that there are sort of high and low levels of these 2 dimensions. We will focus on 2 levels of warmth and 3 levels of control. So for warmth, if you're high warmth, you're openly warm, affectionate, you're involved, you're responsive to emotional needs, you're spending time with them. This is the parent who lights up when the child comes in a room. They're loving and they hug, very, very warm and responsive. Low warmth, parents look sometimes uninvolved and sometimes just downright hostile. Low warmth parents are focused on their own needs rather than the kids' needs. They're not offering warmth and comfort. They're not spending time with them. They're not responsive. They're not interested in the child's emotional state. When it comes to control, we're going to consider 3 different levels of control: high, low, and moderately high. So your high control parent is too high. They are dictatorial. They are regulating every facet of the kids' lives. No, you can't be in theater. You're going to do violin. No, you can't take on-level math. You're going to take the high-level math, and you better get an A, that kind of thing. Low control is a hands-off parent. They often don't know where their kids are or what they're doing. And the kid can sass and keep their room a mess and come in late, and the parent is not really They might say they're concerned, but they're not going to do anything about it. Moderately high control parents set reasonable standards. High standards, but reasonable, like the child can actually do it. They also monitor behavior. They know where the kids are. So when we put these two together across a continuum like this, so then you get these 4 different parenting styles. So let's take a look at what we have here. So right here going horizontally, this is warmth, also known as responsiveness and supportiveness. So warmth goes this way from low to high. And then on this axis, we have behavioral control, also sometimes called demandingness. So from low to high on control or demandingness. All right, so if you are moderately high on control and, high on warmth and moderately high on control, you are what's considered an authoritative parent. This is a parent who's assertive. They help the child with self-regulation. They're very warm. They're flexible. There's guidelines. The standards are reasonably high, but not too high. They're trying to support the child in their movements toward adulthood. If you're over here, then your warmth is very high, but your demandingness or control is quite low. And this is considered a permissive parent. They tend to be a little too warm, a little overly involved, overly indulgent. They don't set any guidelines. They don't hold the child to any kind of standard. Over here, if you have a low warmth and very high control, this is the authoritarian parent. They're rigid. They punish. They demand obedience. They have overly rigid structures. It's sort of the I'm the boss kind of a parent, because I said so kind of parent. And then if you are over here with low control and low warmth, then this is the uninvolved parent, who is neglectful, absent, passive, uninterested in the child. So let's take a little bit of a deeper look at each of the parenting styles. And this is interesting in and of itself. I'm sure that as we're going through this, you'll be thinking about your own parents. And if you are a parent, I hope you think about that as well and try to figure out where do your parents and where do you fit in. But it gets more interesting than that, because this research has been done many, many times. And one of the things that they've done is they've taken a look at, okay, what was the parenting style like and how did the kid turn out? And it turns out that there are significant associations between parenting style and child outcome. So let's take a look at each of the styles and think about the outcome. So your authoritative parent, remember, and students often get authoritative and authoritarian mixed up. So just try to do what you can to get this straight. Authoritative parenting is moderately high control and high warmth. They're setting limits and they're enforcing the rules. If the curfew was midnight and you came in at 12:30, there's some kind of a consequence, but it's going to be a reasonable consequence. But they're flexible and they listen to their children. The parents will explain the rules. They encourage discussion. So here's an example. When my son got his first phone in 6th grade, we put monitoring software on a monitoring app on the phone to prevent him from spending 6 hours a day on the phone, to prevent him from seeing porn or violence or going into chat rooms, and I would look at the phone pretty regularly and see what kinds of conversations he's having with his friends. And we did that for a few years until we thought he was more mature and could handle the phone. And of course, how did he feel about this? He hated it, of course. And for several years, he would have ongoing discussions with me about how dumb this was and how he didn't think it should be on his phone. And so as an authoritative parent, I'm willing to be flexible. I'm willing to listen. I'm willing to have the discussion. And so if he wanted to argue with me about that, I would listen to his arguments and I would try to understand his point of view and recognize what he was saying and give concessions where I could. And then I would make my arguments and maybe give him articles to read and explain why it is that the monitoring software is on the phone. It's there because a 12-year-old kid doesn't have the self-regulation to do it all on his own. Brain development is still happening, and you don't want to wire the brain up wrong. Exposure to porn at that vulnerable age accidentally because you typed in the wrong thing would be very, very damaging to the child. So we had those conversations for years, and an authoritative parent will do that. Now, what do you think these kids turn out like? So children of authoritative parents turn out pretty darn well. They get pretty good grades. They're responsible. They're self-reliant, friendly, successful, articulate, happy with themselves, generous with others, and well-liked by teachers and peers. We will get into why authoritative parenting works so well. It's that combination of lots and lots of warmth along with moderately high control. Okay, your authoritarian parent, do you remember what the characteristics here are? It is excessively high control and low warmth. So their demands are over the top. It's not do the best you can and get the best grades you can. It's you must get an A and you must be in the top of your class and you'd better be in the top 5. Or you must be a year ahead of your peers in math. Or it's you came in 2 minutes late from over curfew, and so no phone for 2 months. The punishments tend to be pretty strict. There's also very low warmth here. They're not lovey-dovey. It's not hugging. They probably don't say, I love you. They're not going to spend time together watching movies and cracking up. There's not a lot of communication. If the kid wants to argue about the monitoring app on his cell phone, parent's not going to put up with that. It's going to be, I said so, and that is why you're doing it. And you better shut up right now. I'm done with this conversation. They're very dictatorial. They expect extremely hard work. They expect utmost respect, and they expect immediate obedience at all times. So this is the parent who, there's a pretty strict punishment if you forgot to say ma'am. This is a parent who might punish when the kid is working on their homework at the table and they're not getting it done fast enough, or the kid's confused and getting answers wrong. The parent might punish for this rather than helping the child and saying, hey, let's figure out where you're confused and let's make sure you understand. This is a parent who says, you're going to sit there through dinner, no dinner, until you get this done and get it right. We have to clarify something, though. The warmth is low in terms of what's expressed. Okay, there's not hugging and spending time together and I love you and lighting up when the child walks in the room. Usually, they do love the child very much, but they don't show it. And they might not show it for a number of reasons. They might not show it because they don't know quite how. Their parents never showed love to them, and so it feels really awkward and weird, and they don't know quite what to do. Or they might have a more articulated view of this where they actually think it would be bad to have that kind of warmth in the parent-child relationship. They might actually think that if you are spending all that time and laughing and, hugging and I love you and you're awesome and you're my favorite person, that kind of stuff, they might actually think that makes the child soft or damages the respect that the child needs to have for the parent. So that's not an uncommon view. Some of you may be going, oh yeah, that's how my parent is. What do you think these kids turn out like? I wish we were in class together to have this discussion. There are 2 routes to take from authoritarian parenting, and one is called externalizing and one is called internalizing. Your externalizing kid, there's 2 ways that we deal with upset and problems. We either externalize it and put it out there in the world, or we internalize it and we shove it in down to a little point inside of ourselves. Your externalizing kid is the one who throws tantrums and acts out and is disobedient and gets in trouble because they're stressed and upset. And your internalizing kid is one who becomes depressed and anxious and they bury it all inside and then they might someday explode. So your externalizing authoritarian parenting suppresses the individual expression of the child and makes them feel unloved, usually, not always. We'll see there are some cultural differences here, but oftentimes it makes the child feel inadequate and suppressed and controlled. And so they might externalize and become unhappy and have low self-esteem and be overtly aggressive. They might rebel as an adolescent and leave home as early as they possibly can. Some of you are going, yep, that's me. The internalizing child is going to take that unhappiness and that low self-esteem and instead become really conscientious, really obedient, really quiet, because they're trying to avoid the parents' wrath. And they're just trying to fly under the radar. So this is a kid who ends up feeling guilty, depressed. They blame themselves when things don't go well. Okay, so that's authoritarian, excessively high control and low warmth. Your permissive parent is your high warmth, low control parent. High warmth, lots of nurturance, lots of communication, maybe too much communication. This is a parent who's going to tell all their war stories about drugs and sex and things like that that are probably inappropriate to tell your child. But real low demands, very little control. They'll let their kid do whatever they want to do. It can be as extreme as the picture you see here, where the parent is actually drinking and smoking with a young child and providing it. Have you ever had a friend, or maybe your parent did this, where they say, well, I know that my teenager is going to drink, so I'm going to provide it, and they'll do it in my own home, and that'll keep them safe. You can see this is coming from a place of where they're trying to do a good job, but this is permissive parenting. They are indulgent. They're not going to punish. They're simply going to accept the child's behavior. Child comes home with D's. Child is truant from school. Child sasses and is rude, stomps off. They just simply accept the behavior. Now, it can, like I said, it can be this bad where they're really enabling the child. It could be the parent who's just kind of lost control and doesn't monitor the child in their teenage years and lets them, there is no such thing as curfew. And when they don't do their chores, there's no consequence. But it starts much earlier than that. And it can look very well-meaning. Let me give you a little story. So I used to take my kids to library story time when they were little. And, library story time is sort of about literacy. It's kind of about books, but honestly, that's not the majority of what it's about. The majority of library story time for an 18-month-old child or a 3-year-old child is socializing them. Socializing them, we'll say 18 months, to sometimes we sit on mom's lap and we don't run around the room. Sometimes we listen to the teacher, and sometimes we get to talk and sing and dance and move. Sometimes we have to wait until another kid has a turn before we have a turn. That's a lot of what library story time is about. So I would take my kids to this, and I enjoyed observing what was happening in the room. And there would always be the parent, always be one parent who would have the kid who was real squirmy and didn't want to sit on the lap, and they would be trying to keep them on the lap, and they would eventually let them get down and go a little bit away from them while the teacher's reading the book. And they're not supposed to be doing that. They're supposed to be staying on the lap. And the book is only 5 minutes, because at 18 months, 5 minutes is maximum a child can sit. And then they better go and do a finger play or dance or blow bubbles or do something like that. So 5 minutes is all you're asking of this kid. But some of them they're all going to have a hard time with this. And there's multiple ways to handle this. And one way is to sort of give up on keeping them there and let them get down and go a little bit ways away. Well, once they do that, what are they going to want to do? They're going to want to go further. And so the mom may let them go further and a little bit further until finally she's had enough of it and she grabs him and says, come back here. Or maybe she just lets him run all around the room and go behind the teacher and unplug the stereo and do all kinds of stuff like that. Okay, so that's not the way to do it, because that's a parent who is saying to the child, I don't think that you can handle this. Well, guess what? An 18-month-old can handle sitting on your lap for 5 minutes. They can. But a permissive parent is thinking, well, they can't really do it. He's so squirmy. I'll just let him go a little ways away. But that confuses the child. He's confused by this. He no longer knows what the boundary is. And so he goes a little bit ways away. He thinks this is okay because you let him do it. And then when he goes further and you're mad, he doesn't understand. So you're better to just let them sit on your lap. And when they start to squirm a little bit, you just whisper in the ear, we're just going to sit right here, rub their back a little bit, point to the teacher, see, listen, we're listening to the story. And if you do this enough, they will learn. And this is the beginning of asserting authoritative parenting and not being the permissive parent who lets them run all over the room. Because if you let them run all over the room at 18 months, what do you think they're going to do when they're 15 or 10? Okay, so what do you think permissively parented kids turn out like? It's not real good, to be honest. A lot of kids think they want permissive parents, but they honestly really don't. In fact, what you often hear from, say, a 24-year-old who had permissive parents is, I wish that they had loved me enough to set some limits. So children of permissive parents often end up impulsive and have very little self-control because they've never been taught how to have that self-control. At 18 months, they were allowed to run around the room. And so then at 10, they don't know anything. They're often very unhappy and lack self-control in peer relationships. And, nobody likes to be friends with the kid who has poor self-control, right? You don't like that kid very much. The one who shouts out in class and gets you all in trouble, the one who gets mad and breaks the rules in the basketball game and stomps off. We tend not to like that kid, and so they tend to be unhappy partly because of that. They don't have good emotion regulation. Mom and dad didn't teach them how to regulate their emotions. They just let them have it and have diarrhea of emotion, and so they never learn to regulate it, and that contributes to difficulties with peer relationships. They're immature, and this immaturity is going to persist. If they've never been asked to sit still at library story time at 18 months, and they've never been asked to keep their room clean at age 10, and they've never been asked to come in at curfew at 16, then at 20, they're still going to be living in the basement, still dependent on the parents, living at home, unable to do adult things. They've never been asked to do mature adult things, and so they don't know how. Okay, let's take a look at the neglectful, uninvolved parenting style. This one is the low warmth and low control. Baumrin didn't initially theorize this one. This came out of Maccabee and Martin. The parents are really indifferent toward the children. They're unaware of what's going on in the kids' lives. They provide mainly for the child's basic physical needs, maybe some basic emotional needs, but they're not going to spend time with the child. Okay. So this is the worst parenting style. These children tend to earn poor grades. They're more aggressive. They have to learn to provide for themselves because the parents don't do it. And this is not in a good way. Your authoritative parent gives you the challenges such as, okay, now it's time to learn to take care of your own backpack. Now it's time to learn to make your lunch. Now it's time to learn to pay your insurance. And they slowly give you more and more adult opportunities. The neglectful parent, though, has given you responsibility for yourself from a very early age when you weren't ready for it at all and could not have been ready for it. And so you learn to provide for yourself, and you're afraid of becoming dependent on other people. You never learned that mom and dad, you could depend on them, and that was okay and that was safe. But of course, we have to depend on other people in adulthood. And so this really stunts emotional development. They're often emotionally withdrawn. They have never gotten that emotional warmth from mom and dad, and so they become very withdrawn, and they don't expect to get it from anybody else. We get more delinquency, we get fear, anxiety, and stress, and we have an increased risk of substance abuse with this particular style. Okay, so this just gives you the 4 styles again. So authoritative is the best outcomes with moderately high control and high warmth. Permissive is high warmth and low control. These children end up unregulated and sort of out of control and immature and unhappy. Your authoritarian parenting is excessively high control and low warmth, love the child but don't show it, and kids either externalize or internalize. And then the uninvolved is low warmth and low control, and then you get some delinquency and substance abuse and emotional withdrawal and inability to form good relationships. So I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to ask you to do a little reflection assignment where you tell me a little bit about what your parenting was like. And I want you to, in that assignment, make sure that you use the research that I just presented to you. Tell me about your parents and what they were like, and refer back to this. If your parents were permissive, use this information right here. Use this information right here. Tell me, is this kind of how you turned out or not? And you may not have. It might be that you had a permissive parent and you didn't turn out like this, and that's okay too. Just because we say that there is a relation between two variables, such as parenting style and outcome, doesn't mean that all people turn out like that, right? So go ahead and give me a paragraph or two on that. Take a look at the assignment that comes next.